Do you want to learn how to garden and grow your own nutritious and delicious food? Let's get started. Hi. So today's presentation is a PowerPoint presentation that my husband and I gave in 2021, so 4 years ago now. We gave it to an Edmonton group that had a lot of beginning gardeners. It was a community garden group. So let's get started. The first image is that of our house when we lived in Edmonton, and we had these big planter boxes covering almost all of our front yard and our side yard. We had things growing, and then we had things growing in our backyard as well. What will be covered today? Reasons to garden, raised beds versus ground level beds, adding manure to soil, best watering practices, plants for short, mid-range, and long season, crop rotations, where to prepare garden beds, ingredients of healthy soil, how to prepare garden plots, when to plant for our region, and we live in the Alberta Edmonton region, so that's a zone 3-ish. How to extend the growing season, and seed saving and pollination. Reasons to garden. Improved nutrients in food. You get some exercise. Food security and availability. Building community through food sharing and being outside and visiting with others. We had so many people stop and talk to us all the time we were outside in our garden, because it's very unusual to have big raised garden beds in your front yard. So yeah, we had a great time visiting and talking with others as they walked by and saw our gardens. Learn responsibility. It's a great way to teach our kids to be responsible for something and take care of something. Relaxation. There's actually microbes in the soil that induce a feeling of peace and calmness. Decreased cost of food. Self-reliance. Less yard to mow, my personal favorite. And you can grow varieties that are unavailable in stores. And you have a connection to your food and the life cycle. Where to prepare garden beds. Look for warm, sunny microclimates, areas in full sun, south-facing walls, gentle south slopes, white fences that reflect sunlight, large rocks as they hold heat and create a little microclimate as well, areas not in shade, and look for partly shaded areas that receive at least half the day in sunshine. So this could be an east-facing wall or a west-facing wall, or even some place that has maybe some tree overhang, but it still gets half the day in sunlight. Watching how the shadows cross your property in the spring will tell you where the shadows will be in the fall as well. Look for areas getting sun all day, and you may have to remove trees if you have a small plot and no sunlight. Look for where puddles form as well, as standing water will waterlog your garden plants. You want areas that receive good waterfall, but also have good drainage. So this image is of our east wall garden boxes. All of our front yard faced to the east, but we even planted in these garden boxes that were right up next to the house. And they actually were pretty warm because of the heat reflected off the walls, but they didn't get very much water because of sheltering from the rain sometimes. So we just had to be careful to water those more. This image is the south wall of our garage. And there was about 2 feet between the wall and the fence, but that was just enough space for us to plant grapes there. And they grew up in between the wall and the fence and were able to produce. And it was actually really good because the south wall reflected heat back onto the grapes, and grapes are very heat loving. They don't like cold. And then this is the south fence of our northern fence. South face of our northern fence. And against that we had an espalier apple tree. And in the back, you can also see a fabric tent. And in that tent, we had, I think, up to 12 breeding rabbits in our Edmonton city yard, which is pretty amazing that we could grow most of our food in that small little plot. And we lived on a corner lot, so in some ways it was better because we didn't have a neighbor right next to it who might complain. But rabbits are really quiet, and it was a great choice to have in that little area. And then this is the north face of that northern fence where we had raspberries growing. And there is still enough light for them as they were a few feet away from the fence line, and they got all the morning sun and afternoon sun. Yeah, they were still able to get enough. And so that fence would shade them a little bit during midday, so they got partial sun, but it was fine for those raspberries. So the pros of raised beds. The ease of working due to the height of the bed. It's more accessible for those with physical challenges, and that's why I wanted them. My back is often sore, so it was really good for me. It warms up the soil sooner in the spring, and the soil stays warmer throughout the growing season. It can add beauty to the landscape. Because the soil is not walked on or tilled, the soil structure, the spaces in between the particles, is maintained and not compacted or disturbed. Fungi networks which feed the soil and the plants are disturbed by tilling. Due to no tilling, weed seeds in the seed bank are not brought up to the top layer where they can germinate, and this means you have less weeds to pull. It protects against some insects and pests and rodents, such as slugs and rabbits. We had a lot of rabbits in our Edmonton neighborhood, and it wasn't very often that you would see them up on top of the raised bed, but we often saw them running in between the raised beds. They were quite cute. And the slugs, they don't like to climb up the wood that far. So a deeper soil depth also allows for root crops to grow deeper, which means you get more food for the same amount of square footage. And we'll have pictures at the end of the slideshow that show exactly what I mean about how our food was able to grow bigger. It was easier to spread soil amendments where needed, rather than needing to amend a whole plot, including the spaces where the people walk, and no plants are grown. In this scenario, you only put your soil amendments in the spaces where the plants are actually growing. This is really beneficial in wet areas as raised beds dry out faster than if on the level. And you have less grass to mow. Produce grown in deep raised bed versus produce grown in a conventional garden plot or in the ground. The raised bed produce is bigger and longer. And in here you can see in these photos, the one on the upper right is showing our potatoes that were about 7 inches, some of them. They were huge. And you can see it against my chest, some of those huge ones. And we had carrots that were as long as my whole arm, from fingertip up to my armpit, basically. Same with the parsnips. Because those deep raised beds, we had the carrots and parsnips growing this long. Whereas the bottom left photo is showing, yes, we got a lot of carrots in a flat garden plot, but they were all quite smaller. And that garden plot was in 2020. We went to stay the summer at my parents who live in the country, and they have a 1 acre garden plot. And this was all during the sea. And we were able to camp outside there and grow a garden there, while at the same time growing a garden in our Edmonton raised beds. So we had 2 harvests, which was pretty amazing. But I'll tell you what, the one in Edmonton, we did almost no work on, whereas the one in the flat ground plot at my parents', I was working like 10 hours a day on that garden. And yes, it produced, but hands down, I will go for a raised bed with mulch if I can every time. But we'll talk about that more in the coming slides. So the cons of raised beds: initial cost for construction, the labor and materials cost a lot, or can cost a lot. Sometimes you can do it for free or find different ways to do it. Staking and trellising can be more difficult because they are already raised. One year I grew a pole pea on top of our raised beds, and so I had to basically stand on a chair or a ladder to get to it, so that wasn't the best plan, looking back. But that's okay. You would just put in bush varieties instead. The beds need more moisture as they can dry out faster. You have to replace the wood over time if you're using wood. Some raised beds are made out of metal, so that might be a really good option. Fixed size, which can limit the garden size and your planting rotations. And we'll talk more about planting rotations later, because you need to rotate your crops so you don't have the same thing growing in the same spot year after year. As soil components break down in the soil over time, more amendments are required to keep the soil level up. So this was something that we noticed as the things would decompose in our beds, because they weren't filled with completely soil. They were filled with some straw and wood chips and other things, and then with soil on top and wood chips, that as those things decomposed and settled, our beds would settle. So we'd have to refill them up. And here we have some pictures of constructing the raised beds. So the first year we tried just turning over the soil and planting into the sod, just to see if we would like this configuration and if it was worth progressing on with that. We did. And then we moved on to building the raised planter boxes. And there's my husband and son doing all the digging and building and filling the boxes. And then the next one, you see a better look of them filled with soil. That's my husband. He's so handy. I'm so grateful for him. Okay, so the pros and cons of a flat garden plot. The pro is you can enlarge or reduce the size easily. You don't have to worry about building something. There's an ease of crop rotation because you generally have more room, and you don't have fixed areas. You can change direction if you want of your rows or plots. It may not dry out as much because it's not raised. Everything is flat and it's holding the water. Bigger plot means you have the potential for a bigger harvest. The cons are that you're working on the ground and bending over. Often I was on my hands and knees for hours at a time. Bugs and pests have easy access to your crops. You have to water larger areas, and you can have flooding without the proper drainage. The soil gets compacted from walking on it, and there's a bigger area, which means more planting, weeding, and mulching. Here is one of the pictures from our flat garden plot in 2020 when we were at my parents'. And trying to remember what's in this front bit. I know in the center part where there's straw, that was corn, and then there's tomatoes behind that. And then under the trees, you'll see that we've got 3 cages, and we had rabbits there for the summer with us. And then in this next picture of our flat plot garden, in the front is the tomatoes. In the back was peas and onions and lettuce and, oh, I'm not sure. Cabbages are on the right. There's so many things there, and it was a while ago. It's hard to remember. Ingredients of healthy soil. The topsoil holds nutrients such as nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, etc. Soil also generally has some sand in it, and the sand has minerals and allows moisture to drain and move through the soil. There's also humus. Humus holds on to moisture in the soil, creates air pockets, and is the habitat for microbes, fungal rhizomes, insects, and animals to thrive and be a benefit to the soil and plants growing there. Humus is decaying plant matter such as peat moss, compost, manure, coconut coir, leaves, grass, straw, etc. That also includes the leftover debris from gardens in the past. It adds carbon and nitrogen to the soil. Too much clay means that your soil would be gummy and wet, so you would want to add humus and sand. If you have too much humus, or peat, which makes it too fluffy, you want to add topsoil and sand. If there's too much sand, and you would know this because your soil would blow away in the wind and won't hold water, you need to add humus, which is carbon matter. If plants are yellowing, there is too much nitrogen. So you could add gypsum powder, not straight lime, as it can sterilize the soil. Seaweed or kelp is an excellent soil additive with many nutrients and minerals. And you can often find seaweed or kelp at an animal feed store. They'll have big bags, 50-pound bags of dried kelp. And if you could get rock dust, that is a great amendment to put on your garden because it has minerals and all the trace minerals that you need, or that your plants need. So when we first started our raised beds, we tried to put on unaged bark wood chips. And because they hadn't aged, as they sat on the soil and decomposed, it was actually taking nitrogen out of the soil. And so our plants were yellowing because there wasn't enough nitrogen. So that's why we're talking about that here. So adding manure to the soil. Manure is high in nitrogen. Too much nitrogen will cause the plants to burn or turn yellow again and not thrive. It can also cause plants to produce too many leaves and not enough fruits or vegetables. Rabbit manure is the best type of manure because it does not need time to mellow and lose some of its nitrogen to be safe for plants. Other manures need at least a year or two of aging in order to be usable in the garden. For example, horse manure needs about 4 to 5 years of aging so that the seeds in the manure are broken down and do not sprout in the garden. Since we've started raising goats, I also know that goat manure can be put onto the garden as well, straight. It doesn't need to be aged, apparently. Chicken manure. Chicken manure is very hot. Do not put that on the garden unless you've aged it or it has a lot of carbon to go with it, such as wood chips or straw or leaves. It has to be mixed in well with something that can offset that nitrogen. So nitrogen, manure, and crop rotations. Manure adds lots of nitrogen to the soil. Pulses or beans and peas also fix nitrogen into the soil. So there's bacteria on the plant roots that gather nitrogen from the air and then fix little pockets or nodules of nitrogen in the soil. Green leafy plants need lots of nitrogen. The examples would be lettuce, Swiss chard, kale, cabbage, collards, and also potatoes, apparently. To prevent diseases in your plants and to fix and use nitrogen in different areas of the garden, rotate where the crops are grown each year. For example, year 1, grow nitrogen fixtures such as peas and beans. Anywhere that is heavily manured would also be considered high in nitrogen. Year 2, plant leafy greens in that area, and they will take up some of that nitrogen. Year 3, plant vegetables that make fruits, such as cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, etc. And then year 4, plant root crops, as they don't need much nitrogen. So this would include onion, beet, carrot, turnip, rutabaga, parsnip, things like that. And pro tip, keep a journal or map of where your crops are grown each year so you can rotate the crops. If you forget, it's really hard to remember where you put things from year to year. How to prepare garden beds. So you'll start with the topsoil, and then you'll put compost on if you have it, and then you can put a mulch layer on top of that. Ideally, add more compost and mulch on top of the beds each year. Just pull back the mulch layer a little bit to plant seeds into the soil. This is the basis of no-till gardening, and it works great for raised beds and flat garden plots. Other names for this general method include lasagna gardening, the Ruth Stout no-till method, Back to Eden gardening, Masanobu Fukuoka, he has a book called The One Straw Revolution, Charles Dowding, no-till, and there's many others out there. So how to prepare garden beds? Continued. Hugelkultur, digging a pit and adding a carbon-rich filler such as wood, logs, straw, etc. to hold moisture, then cover the mound with topsoil again. In this type of bed, the wood or straw will slowly decompose and add nutrients to the bed, and it will retain water like a sponge, so the plants have a reservoir of moisture to draw from through dry periods. This is what we did in our raised beds. We put straw bales in the beds and then covered them with soil, compost, and eventually mulch. A no-dig method. Cover the ground with flattened cardboard boxes to block grass and weeds, then cover the soil, compost, and mulch. Let it sit for 1 year for the cardboard to decompose, or plant into it immediately, although you won't be able to grow long root crops because they won't be able to get through the cardboard the first year, as the cardboard will not yet be decomposed and allow the roots to penetrate through. This is similar to the lasagna gardening method. And this you could put right over grass to start a new bed. You put down your cardboard, soil, compost, mulch. 1 year we tried turning over the sod about 8 inches deep and adding soil on top of the turned over sods to create a quick garden. It worked reasonably well, but the grass came through the turned over sod, so it's not a good long-term solution to starting a garden. A couple years after this, we also tried to do a quick garden on a friend's land because we were living in town and we didn't have any way to do it. And we put down cardboard and then put a lot of topsoil down, and we weren't able to mulch it with anything. And it worked reasonably well. Actually, it was a pretty good garden. It was just so full of weeds, but that's not because it didn't work. It did work with putting the cardboard down and then the soil. For more information on different ways of growing food, research topics such as permaculture and regenerative farming, or regenerative agriculture. Watering best practices. Your garden will want 1 inch of water at least once per week. Twice per week is better. Frequent light watering causes the plant roots to come to the surface in search of water rather than burrowing deep into the ground. If there is a drought or water shortage, the plants become stressed. If the roots go deep, though, plants can continue to find moisture deeper in the ground. Spot watering with a soaker hose is best as it delivers water directly to the roots, but it's not always feasible. To measure what 1 inch of water is during one session of watering, put an empty tuna can amongst the plants. When it is filled, that is about 1 inch of water delivered to the plants. And there's a link there to where that idea came from. It came from whos.com. The last 2 summers, we have barely watered our raised bed garden, maybe twice each summer because we got so much rain. At this time, I was thinking it was due to the lack of solar flares and the grand solar minimum that was happening. And that is projected to last for the next couple of decades. We're not sure, but it's a possibility because climate change always happens. For thousands of years, our climate has always been changing, so I'm not going to get into that debate. But that was the summer that we lived, we camped at my parents', and we had a garden down there in the flatland plot, plus in our Edmonton garden. It rained all the time, and our raised beds in Edmonton were mulched, and it grew those huge vegetables, and I didn't have to weed, I didn't have to water, anything. We just came back when the summer was done and harvested all that food. So that was pretty amazing. So when to plant for our climate in Edmonton? Edmonton, we have a hardiness zone of about 3A, 3B, And any perennials or plants that live longer than a year must be able to withstand temperatures down to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Edmonton frost dates are last frost in the spring, May 10th, first frost in the fall around September 11th. Any annuals or plants that live only one season must mature during this growing period. This is just a guide though, as Alberta can have late and early frosts. And again, with a grand solar minimum and many volcanic eruptions this year, again, 2021, when I wrote this, the growing season may be negatively impacted. And we have a picture here from westcoastseeds.com. It's the zone finder and an average annual extreme minimum temperature of the growing zones from the Oregon State University. It is from Wikimedia. So, ways of extending the growing season. Buy plants already started that can be transplanted outside once it's warm enough. Start your own plants indoors that can be transplanted outside once it's warm enough. Use cold frames, cloches, plastic hoop houses, structures, greenhouses to keep plants warm. Use old sheets, blankets, quilts, curtains, towels, etc. to cover plants when it may freeze. And bring plants inside in planters if you really want to keep them alive over the winter. In this picture here, I've got some sorrel that I was growing that we dug up and brought it in to keep it alive over the winter. We also have grapefruit and orange trees that obviously would not survive in an Alberta winter, so we had them growing inside. Extending the growing season continued. On the bottom photos, we have a picture that is from my brother. He lives near Red Deer, Alberta, so about the same growing zone as Edmonton. And he uses plastic tunnels for growing watermelon because Alberta is nowhere near hot enough to grow watermelon, but he's able to successfully do it, and he's quite proud of it because it's hard to do in Alberta. And he grows wonderful watermelons, but he has to keep them covered to keep them warm. And then once it gets real hot in the summer, he will take off the plastic because he doesn't want them to overheat. So know the requirements of the plants you intend to grow and if they fit with your climate and context. Let's see. On the top left of this, there's a cold frame. On the top right, there's a plastic cloche. That's an example. And the other grow tunnel, the grow tunnel on the bottom right is a picture from my sister. She's in Idaho and she grows watermelons as well. Lucky. I forgot to add my little moment of brag that last year, where we live now, I was able to grow watermelons successfully in Alberta, which is really hard to do, like I said, because it's too cold here. But we made raised beds that were 4 feet wide by 4 feet tall by 8 feet long. So we were using pallets and filled those with carbon layers because you can't fill all of that with dirt. It would just cost too much. But there was a lot of carbon and manure and stuff, and then topsoil on the top. And it was basically a big, warm compost pile that we grew our watermelons on. So that kept the watermelons warm. And I was able to grow them, and I didn't have to cover them over for the summer to keep them warm at all. Just the heat from the compost did it. So there's an idea for you. And actually, I got that idea from, Dirt Cheap Heaven. It's a lady, she's on YouTube, and she grows stuff down in Idaho. And she uses that system. So when crops mature, there are short season crops, mid-range season crops, and long season crops. Let's go over the short season crops first. For those you want to plant every 2 weeks, you can have succession planting to have a continuous supply throughout the season. And this would include things like radishes, lettuce, green peas, green bush beans. Pole beans can produce more, but they take longer. Endives, green onions, cilantro, parsley, dill, Swiss chard. Mid-range season crops could include green pole peas, green pole beans, and of course, this would also include purple and yellow pole peas and beans. kale, zucchini, potatoes, and you can steal from potatoes before they're fully ripened or fully grown, so you can get little miniature potatoes. Beets, broccoli, cauliflower, dill, turnips, Swiss chard. Long season crops. Anything you want to save seed from, let it go until it's completely grown and even dying on the vine. Tomatoes, carrots. Carrots are frost hardy, but they're even better after a frost, and same as parsnips. Potatoes are frost hardy, so they're good to start early and they can go fairly late. Kohlrabi, dill, as the seed heads are frost hardy. Swiss chard, bulb onions grown from sets or from seed. Garlic. Garlic should be planted in the fall before, because it takes a cold time and then a long season. Squashes, pumpkins, Brussels sprouts, celery, dry beans, dry peas. Look for varieties that mature earlier to fit our growing season. Just a little word about tomatoes, because there's determinate and indeterminate varieties. Determinate varieties usually mature quicker, and they all kind of mature at once. Whereas indeterminate varieties, they can probably, maybe, take longer to mature, and they will just keep going. They won't stop. So if you have a long season, sure, go ahead with a indeterminate variety. If you have a short season, you could go determinate or indeterminate, but just be aware that there may be differences in your harvest and harvest times. What to plant? What you plant will be based on your food production goals and your soil and climate context. Learn the requirements of the plants you want to grow to see if they will work in your context. Different goals may include cost savings, taste, health, or survival. Such as survival, you would be growing roots, tubers, corn, and squashes to provide bulk and calories for sustenance. If you're looking at cost savings, greens are really easy to grow and save you the most money, as they are really expensive to buy. However, I would also say that squashes are very expensive to buy too. So, tomatoes, peas, and beans always taste superior grown in your garden rather than bought from the store. So that's for taste. I love the homegrown ones so much more. However, I would want to caution you, if you're going for taste, you don't want to grow seeds from a tomato that you bought at the store, unless it tastes great. Because most tomatoes, for instance, from the store, or green beans sometimes, they grow the ones that are the easiest to transport or the easiest to process, and they may not be the best tasting. So, whereas if you buy varieties that are, or use seeds from varieties that are not normally used in the store, you will generally get a better product to eat. Okay, planning for seed saving. Why save seeds? Or how to save seeds. For dry seeds, you let the seed pods ripen on the plant as long as possible, and then if they're not dry, you bring them inside and let them dry even longer. Then you shell them and dry some more and store in a cool, dry place. Let's go back to the top. Why save seeds? That you can save money by not having to buy seeds every year. You can provide food security if you cannot buy seeds in the future. You can save your favorite types of vegetables or fruits for future use. Saved seed is acclimated to your growing conditions. And there's a whole world of landrace seeds. And you can just Google that, landrace seed saving, and you'll find people gathering their own seeds and saving them from year to year to get the best varieties that grow in their context, in their climate. So it's something to really look up. It preserves the genetic diversity of our food system. If we all only grew one type of pea and this variety became diseased and everyone's crop died, it would be disastrous. Plants' genetic diversity protects us all from such scenarios. That was one of the things that caused the potato famine in Ireland. They all were growing basically a couple or one type of potato, and that potato was susceptible to disease, and the whole crops got wiped out for everyone. Saved seeds from hybrids do not reproduce true to type, just so you know. You can save seeds from hybrids, and they will generally produce. Sometimes they'll be sterile, but most of the time they'll produce. They just won't be the exact same as the plant that it came from. But that's okay. If you're interested in developing new things and experimenting, go for it. I do. So, to prevent cross-pollination, you'll want to plant different species and space different varieties far enough apart. Now, that distance will vary from plant to plant or species to species of what you're growing, so I can't just say plant them 30 feet apart, because some things you'll have to plant maybe a long ways apart, and some things don't really matter. So like for beans, they're rather self-pollinating, whereas for corn, they will cross-pollinate very easily. Hand pollinate and cover plants with cloth to prevent insects pollinating them with other species pollen if you're really concerned. Note, plant seed potatoes, not potatoes from the store. As the potatoes from the store, the eating potatoes, they're sprayed with chemicals to prevent sprouting. To save seeds, let fruits ripen as long as possible. Don't let them freeze though. For wet seeds, you can give them a quick wash in a strainer, then set them out to thoroughly dry on a towel and then store in a cool, dry place. For me, I generally don't even rinse them. So for tomatoes, I'll just squish some seeds out onto a paper towel, let it dry completely, and then package that paper towel up in some saran wrap and put it in my seed box. Other people will say you have to ferment them and wash them, and that's not true. I have done it for years, and I have saved seed for years. And in fact, I went through and found some tomato seed from 2006, and I planted it in 2024, and it grew. These are tomato seeds. Because I wanted to bring that variety back, make sure I had it. It was a long keeper tomato. So you can save seeds for years, and it's very easy. You don't have to make this complicated or difficult. Just save the seed, make sure it's dry, and store it in a cool, dry spot. Okay? A note on bees. Bees pollinate the plant's flowers, which then produce the fruits. Plant flowers help to attract bees to your garden. Bees travel long distances to collect pollen from various plants, so saving seed from certain plants while in the city may not result in getting the same plants and fruit in the future from your saved seed as you expected, because they may have visited your neighbor's yard who has a pumpkin and you're growing a zucchini, and they get cross-pollinated. That's why saving seed in the city could be not feasible sometimes. But again, it just depends on what you're growing and what you want to save seeds from. Because like I said, beans don't cross-pollinate easily. So you can save seeds from your beans in the city easily. So plants can be cross-pollinated with another variety and produce variable offspring. That just means you get a hybrid. That's okay. Don't use pesticides, as they can harm the bees and beneficial insects that prey on pest insects. Try polyculture planting, or planting more than one type of plant in an area or row, and then use marigolds and nasturtiums to repel pests. And here is photos of our raised bed garden in Edmonton, again from the year 2020. And just to encourage you to look forward to the harvest. On the top left, we've got a huge cabbage. And then moving to our right, there's onions, and then tomatoes, and those are the potatoes on the far right, and different herbs. It's hard to see on that bottom left photo. Maybe kale, cabbage, I don't know. Anyway, gardening, you can have so much joy and security just by growing your own food, and I really encourage you to do it and look forward to what you can make and happen. All right. If you have questions, please leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, because gardening season is upon us. It's time to get started. In fact, for those in the south, you've already started. So anyway, have a great gardening season. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, help a girl out. Thanks.